Was recognized.
I rise in strong opposition to this resolution. As we are all aware, U.S. forces at this very moment are engaged in battle against heavily armed enemy forces in a strategically important region of Afghanistan. Our brave men and women are making steady progress against a deadly foe and are doing so at great risk to their lives. This offensive is part of a new strategy in Afghanistan focused on the immediate goals of disrupting, dismantling, and defeating al-Qaeda, denying al-Qaeda a safe haven, and reversing the momentum of the Taliban. This offensive is already producing dramatic success, including the capture of senior Taliban leaders, the routing of their forces, and the stabilization of key areas. A winning strategy should be supported, not undermined. We must not give Taliban leaders and fighters a shield against U.S. forces that they otherwise cannot stop. No enemy was ever vanquished. No victory was ever secured by running away. Those who wish to destroy us would surely follow us, convinced that we had been beaten and eager to attack us wherever we go, as they would be confident that we can in fact be beaten again. Mr. Speaker, let us dispel any myths or illusions about the consequences of a forced withdrawal. As General Petraeus has warned, and I quote, "I was in Kandahar. It was in Kandahar that the 9/11 attacks were planned. It was in the training camps in eastern Afghanistan where the initial preparation of the attackers was carried out before they went to Hamburg and flight schools in the U.S. It is important to recall the seriousness of the mission and why it is that we are in Afghanistan in the first place, and why we are still there after years and years of hard work and sacrifice that have passed," end quote. One of the principal reasons that we have been spared a repeat of those attacks is that U.S. forces quickly toppled the Taliban regime that was protecting the terrorists and drove it and its al-Qaeda allies out of their safety zone and into the remote mountains. Years of constant U.S. military pressure have forced them to turn their attention from planning more attacks against our homeland to fighting for their own survival. To leave Afghanistan now would pave the way for the reestablishment of a vast and secure base from which al-Qaeda and other deadly enemies could strike Americans around the world. Having withdrawn and abandoned our hard-won positions, our allies and the people of Afghanistan, well, the U.S. credibility would be significantly and perhaps irrevocably damaged. This, in turn, to leave the U.S. alone and more vulnerable than ever to the threats of radical Islamic extremists. Our retreat would be seen around the world by friends and opponents alike as a surrender, as a sign that America no longer has the will to defend herself. We might attempt to fool ourselves into believing that it was merely a temporary setback, that we had suffered no long-term blow. But no one else would be fooled. It would be proof to every group that wishes to attack and destroy us that we can be fought and we can be beaten, that eventually America will just give up, regardless of the consequences. We should support our troops by supporting their efforts to disrupt and dismantle and defeat al-Qaeda and the Taliban. As many of you know, my daughter-in-law Lindsay served in Iraq and Afghanistan. I also have two committee staffers, one in the Army Reserves and one in the Marine Reserves, who are on their way now to Afghanistan. This is not their first time in battle. Both of these gentlemen have served bravely in Iraq, but the prospect of entering combat never becomes routine. They, like my stepson Douglas, who served as a Marine fighter pilot in Iraq, have recounted to me how the debates in Congress to mandate a withdrawal of our forces from Iraq demoralizes U.S. troops. The request of my staffers to me as they embark on their mission to Afghanistan is to provide them with all of the tools and all of the support that they need to defeat the enemy and to win. They ask that we strengthen our commitment, our resolve to the mission in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Our enemies are redoubling their efforts. We must also. In June of last year, Osama bin Laden noted that U.S. efforts had been, and I quote, transferred to Afghanistan and Pakistan. Thus, jihad must be directed at that region, end quote. Bin Laden later said in September, and I quote, not much longer, and the war in Afghanistan will be over. Afterwards, not even a trace of the Americans will be found there. Much rather, they will retreat far away behind the Atlantic. Then only we and you will be left, end quote. We must do everything possible to deny bin Laden and al-Qaeda such a victory. Mr. Speaker, the Afghan people are also listening to today's debate. For us to succeed in Afghanistan, we need their support, but the Afghan people will not be giving that support if they believe that we will abandon them. As Admiral Michael Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has said, quote, when I'm in Afghanistan, I get the same question asked as when I'm in Pakistan, which is, are you going to leave us again? Because they remember very well that we have in the past. And so there's a trust issue here. There's uncertainty through Afghanistan's eyes as to whether or not we will stay, end quote. In cooperating with us, in trusting us, they know that they are risking their lives and those of their families. Our troops are listening as well. This debate today reminds me of the many times that I have come down to the floor to speak against the forced withdrawal from Iraq and the need to support our mission there. Mr. Speaker, it is an illusion to believe that we can protect ourselves from our enemies by picking and choosing easy battles and turning away from those that require patience and sacrifice. This Congress cannot, must not, turn away from its responsibility to defend our country and our citizens simply because the task seems too difficult. The men and women in uniform who willingly risk their lives to defend our country do not believe that. Mr. Speaker, as with all of my fellow members and citizens, I hope for a world one day without war. But in the world we live in, some wars are forced upon us, and we have no choice but to fight and to win them if we are to survive. I urge my colleagues to resoundingly defeat this resolution, and I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman from Ohio.
I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler.